Generally, what we understand a quitclaim deed to do is when you grant something, you say, this is it. You take this from me for this consideration and we're done. There's no lingering warranty or any kind of obligation on me. Once I sell it to you, I'm out of here.
Former Philippine House Speaker Martin Romualdez reportedly transferred a $2.2 million property in Dover, Massachusetts to a corporation just for $1.
I mean, even when you told me about this, my thoughts start turning to, okay, well, who is it going to? Why now? But what I can tell you is that a lot of the information is publicly available, right? So the Secretary of State, or the Secretary of the Commonwealth website has a corporation database. You can search the entity to which this property was transferred. You don't actually even have a crime to charge presently. With the information that we know, there is no crime, right? I mean, it looks weird, but absent other information, that's it.
Hi there, I'm Elijah and I am your special host for this special episode of the Boston Barristers. I'm the Director of Operations here at the Law Office of Matthew Peterson, and as a Filipino myself, I have found this story particularly interesting. It involves former Philippine House Speaker Martin Romualdez, who reportedly transferred a $2.2 million property in Dover, Massachusetts to a corporation just for $1. The news published by Rappler has raised a lot of questions, especially among Filipinos wondering whether a move like this is legal and how U.S. property and corporate laws apply. To help us break this down, we're joined by attorney Chris O'Brien, a highly respected lawyer who spent years as an assistant attorney general for both New Hampshire and Massachusetts, where he prosecuted numerous white-collar crime cases. Today, he'll help us understand what a quitclaim deed is, what might make a $1 property transfer lawful or suspicious, and how cross-border legal systems interpret transactions like this. I'm glad you can join us, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Elijah. I want to make sure one thing is as clear as possible from the beginning. You know, I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic because obviously it's near and dear to my heart from my professional background. But from jump, I'll say that there's no, we're not trying to impute any wrongdoing to anyone here. We're doing this sort of in the context of what is the analysis for something like this, which, as you point out, people are wondering, is this legal? Does this raise any red flags? What does it all mean? And I was an assistant attorney general, as you point out, in Massachusetts doing mostly fraud. I did specialized in insurance fraud, money laundering cases, larceny, that kind of thing, embezzlement. So this is something that I would, you know, if there was wrongdoing, I would be in the thick of it. Maybe not in this case specifically, but this sort of thing was sort of my wheelhouse. When I was in New Hampshire, I was more of a generalist working for a county attorney's office in Rockingham, New Hampshire, Rockingham County. But I handled white-collar cases there, brought them to jury trial. I had white-collar cases in Massachusetts indicted and brought to conviction. I had a case that actually went to a bench trial, which was eerily similar to this one, although it didn't involve real estate transfer. It involved the transfer of high-end automobiles. But like I said, one thing I want to make especially clear is that I can speak to the things that I have experience with, and I want to be really careful throughout the course of the interview to not try and speak to things I don't have experience with. For example, the money laundering asset recovery section, the MLARS people who work for the Department of Justice, are the sort of people who specialize in these international asset, suspicious asset transfers. I got the opportunity to train with those folks, I think last year, and they're really exceptionally good and highly specialized in a way that my career had me doing more broadly. So I'll be careful about speaking to international regulations and compliance stuff I may not be familiar with, and try to make sure the audience understands where I'm coming from in terms of how, for example, a state prosecutor might look at something like this, whether off the bat or in the context of a larger investigation. So with that kind of proviso, happy to answer whatever questions you have to the extent that I'm able.
Yeah, like what you said, we're just going to talk about the facts and the laws. We're not going to impute anybody, just strictly the facts and the laws. So with that, the first question is, Attorney O'Brien, for those who aren't familiar, what exactly is a quitclaim deed and why is it used in real estate transfers?
So a quitclaim deed is something you learn about. It's a term that is, I think, probably understood in common law all over the place, which means it comes from like English law, and it's since time immemorial. But generally, what we understand a quitclaim deed to do is when you grant something, you say, this is it. You take this from me for this consideration and we're done. There's no lingering warranty or any kind of obligation on me. Once I sell it to you, I'm out of here. And the benefit of that is, one, person can't come after you later and be like, what about this? What about this? What about this? There's a whole area of law related to title searches that has to do with this. Like if you sell somebody a piece of property and you don't tell them that there is an easement that allows the public to walk through their backyard to access a public park, that's something that you should tell someone about. And if you use a quitclaim deed, at least in theory, that quitclaim deed puts up a big wall between you and whoever you sold it to. They can't come back to you and say, what about this? What about that? So what does it mean in the context of this case? I guess all it really means is that it looks like whoever the seller is, whoever's transferring this expensive piece of property, is trying to do it in a way that legally severs them from whoever they're selling it to.
Makes sense. And we've seen a lot of headlines about multi-million-dollar properties being transferred for just $1. Is that something that can be done legally?
Believe it or not, it can. And there's, like I said at the top, this could be a completely mundane, anodyne bit of estate planning. And you'd really need to talk to an estate planning attorney. I happen to know some really exceptional estate planning attorneys who would know in the ins and outs of why you would do this, ways that you can do it for tax minimization that isn't tax evasion or fraud. And like I said, I'm not going to get into this because they're not really my specialty. So although it would surprise people to find this out, I had reason to look into this when I was an assistant attorney general. And to my knowledge, there is no crime for hiding assets. So even if that's what this was, there is basically, as far as I can tell, one crime for hiding assets, is in which you're hiding assets to defy a court order. Generally in the context of child supports when it's going to be most common. Which is interesting because in that case it's probably also contempt, so I'm not sure why we need a secondary law for it. But that's, as odd as this looks, right? If you were to find out this was someone hiding assets, it's not going to be a crime that you could go to jail for. Now, the consequences of a fraudulent transfer civilly are going to probably be very different. And like I said, since I don't practice, I don't have a lot of experience in that, I can't really speak to the exposure you might give yourself civilly for that kind of fraudulent transfer, assuming that's what it was. But answering your question again at the that you asked, really there is no necessary illegality to giving somebody something for $1, even if it's worth several million. Could just be a gift.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Law Office of Matthew W. Peterson. If you're facing legal trouble in Massachusetts, whether it's an OUI, a firearm charge, or even just a clerk magistrate hearing, the stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't the time to go at it alone. You need more than just a lawyer. You need a legal team that knows how to fight and knows how to win. That's why people across Massachusetts turn to the Law Office of Matthew W. Peterson. With years of experience in criminal defense, family law, and immigration, we've got the track record and the passion to defend your rights. We've successfully represented clients in some of the toughest situations out there, from first-time offenses to serious felony charges. We've helped people protect their record, their families, and their freedom. So don't wait until it's too late. Visit mwpetersonlaw.com to schedule your consultation or call 617-295-7500. That's mwpetersonlaw.com and 617-295-7500. Because when your future's on the line, you deserve a legal team that's all in. Stay informed, stay legal. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, from your experience in white-collar crime prosecution, when do these kinds of property transfers start to raise legal or ethical concerns?
So I really like the way you asked that question because it's in the context of my investigations, the investigations I used to do, we're already suspicious, right? So there's already a reason we're looking at it to scrutinize it. So in that context, what we're looking at, I'll tell you right away, when I saw something like this, when I was doing an investigation, even when you told me about this, my thoughts start turning to, okay, well, who is it going to? Why now? But what I can tell you is that a lot of the information is publicly available, right? So the Secretary of State, or the Secretary of the Commonwealth website has a corporation database. You can search the entity to which this property was transferred, and you can see from its corporate filings, one, I think it was created earlier this year, and it was for the purpose of holding property, which is an entirely legitimate reason to have a corporation. The fact that it was created probably in the months leading up to this tells me something as an investigator, which is that this company was likely created for the purpose of receiving this specific property. That in and of itself, again, these may be completely innocent and meaningless things, but they are points of information, because if you are a person building a case, or if you're just trying to understand someone's motives, you look at it's sort of a constellation. I think that sometimes you hear the term in the law, a mosaic of what may be meaningless details on their own that become meaningful when you have all of the information. One of them, for example, if this is a gift, why now? If this is, you're doing estate planning because you got bad medical diagnosis, you're making plans that you're trying to get your affairs in order, who knows what it is. But the timing matters. If you can find out, why was this done at this time? Because it is a very expensive piece of property. Conceivably, this person that we're talking about, your former speaker, spent his own money, upwards of $2 million, to acquire this property. And now he has conceivably divested himself of it with this quitclaim deed. He's now like, all right, this is no longer mine, it's gone. For $1? Do we really think that he gave up control, access? Is he still living there? And that, again, may be entirely, I'm sure there are going to be explanations that are fully legal. If this was in the context of a larger investigation, I would wonder what's the status of debt, if we know. But if you have other questions, I want to make sure I don't run over our time here.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. So you told me about the badges of fraud, like the timeline leading up to what he did up to now. But the question that's ringing in my mind is, did he follow the legal procedures, and is something prosecutable in the U.S. about what he did? Don't think about our laws. Think about the U.S. laws.
What I can tell you is, as far as I can tell from what minimal research I've done and what publicly available sources there are, the answers to your question are yes and no. Yes, this seems to have been done within the confines of the law. For example, if you were doing this and you did not incorporate the entity with the Secretary of the Commonwealth, then I wouldn't have been able to find that out by going online and searching their database. So whoever, it looks like there may be an attorney that helped them do this, and that attorney followed what is required anyway to correctly incorporate this entity. Whether that's been followed to the T, I don't know, because I haven't really done that deep a dive. So even that, you get into some pretty arcane kinds of fraud in this area of law that not a lot of people specialize in. And even as a person who specialized in fraud, I probably handled 2 or 3 mortgage fraud cases in the entirety of my 7-year career as a prosecutor. It's pretty rare as a crime, but it's also rare to find people who have the time and the interest and the ability to prosecute it. So whether there is title fraud, mortgage fraud, those things are kind of secondary to what's happened here. And I think what I would tell you, one of the things I was interested to talk to you about most, is that while on its own, there may be nothing illegal about what's been done here. And it could be that if all the motivations are clean, it's just estate planning, what have you, there's going to be nothing that can be done about this. And there's nothing should be done about it. But what's interesting is, as I kind of said before, the constellation or mosaic of details can really change what this is and what it looks like. So if, for example, you were doing an investigation and you found that, totally hypothetically, the money had been embezzled that was used to purchase the property, that money could be seized, and probably would be seized, frankly. MLARs, I think, are iffy on whether or not they seize people's primary residences. But if you have someone who's purchased their umpteenth house with embezzled funds, the feds are probably going to take it. The state probably would try to take it too, my old employer. But there's a process for that. There's a process that's involved in trying to reacquire that. And so the act of a financial transaction to conceal wrongdoing is the essence of money laundering, right? There's kind of a lot more to money laundering that goes on. But what's interesting is, while this exact bit of conduct could be entirely legal, based on other details that we don't know about that maybe do or don't exist and have existed in other cases but may not exist here, the thing could then just be converted to being a crime. It could be money laundering, which is a felony, but only if those other circumstances can change what this is. It's kind of a bottom line.
This is kind of out of the topic here, but would it be is it possible that he can be prosecuted in Massachusetts for this if the motives align, or is he bound by the Philippine law to be prosecuted in the Philippines alone?
Oh, I like this, a jurisdiction question. No, if you're in Mass doing stuff in Mass, I mean, I fought jurisdiction fights interstate. I don't think I ever had to fight them internationally. But I had prosecuted people in jurisdictions as far flung as Texas, and I've had fights over whether or not I'm allowed to do that when I was a prosecutor, and whether I was allowed to do that. The fact of the matter is, if the victim is in Massachusetts, you have a strong legal argument. If the crime was committed in Massachusetts, which in this case, if there was a crime, it would almost certainly arguably have been committed in Massachusetts. You talk about the Philippines, there's something called concurrent jurisdiction, where multiple interested parties may have a legal, in the separate sovereigns is the phrase we use to describe how the federal government, because it encompasses federal jurisdiction is everywhere that all the states have jurisdiction. So somebody could be conceivably prosecuted federally, they could be prosecuted by the state government. There's no reason it would be hands off. And there are limitations to that, right? So if there was embezzlement that occurred in the Philippines and it was sort of being disposed of in Massachusetts, the embezzlement would not be chargeable in mass, but the money laundering would. Because if the embezzled money is being hidden here through a series of sophisticated or even unsophisticated financial transactions, then you use real estate in Massachusetts, you use Massachusetts banks, whatever the means were, you would have a jurisdiction. You'd be able to jurisdiction it here, I think would be an easy way to do that.
What does the U.S. consider a fraudulent conveyance, and would a case like this fall under that category or not?
So I'm aware that there is something, I had to refresh my memory on this. There's a Uniform Fraudulent Transfers Act, which I did not ever have to involve myself in because it's civil, right? There is, since as I pointed out, there's no crime for what it could be considered a fraudulent transfer. Strangely, it may be because Massachusetts has so much common law and a fraudulent transfer may go by another name. It might be a type of larceny. In this case, though, there really wouldn't be, you have to look at what the fraud is. What's the lie? Right? If fraud is essentially a lie, and I think we have some podcasts where I talk with Attorney Peterson about fraud. If fraud is a lie to gain some benefit, the issue with this hypothetical that we're talking about here, where somebody transfers a house for basically nothing, they give it away. What is the lie? Is the lie that you genuinely sold it, like you didn't actually sell it? And then what's the consequence? Because there needs to be someone harmed for there to be gain. And that's where this gets to be very tricky from a prosecutorial perspective. Like, what are you supposed to do if he doesn't have creditors who have been wronged by this? If somebody had creditors who were wronged, what's their relief, right? And I think presently the answer is you can sue somebody. The creditors could sue the debtor, and I think they probably have a pretty strong argument that, like, look, this person's hiding assets. But I'll tell you what, I think I may have mentioned this earlier. I had a case that I prosecuted, or I helped prosecute, where someone was hiding assets from creditors. And the interesting thing is that the hiding was not the crime in that case. It was the variety of insurance fraud that occurred in the details surrounding it, right? So, taking it out of the abstract, maybe as a hypothetical in this case, if the property is insured, and it is insured as though it belongs to a corporation to be used as a museum, but people are actually living in it as a primary residence, that could be mortgage fraud. So then in that instance, you can kind of see what I'm trying to, it's a very tricky abstract thing. The transfer is not really the crime, it's just it's part of the conduct, but the actual, crystallizing crime is going to be what happens because of it or before it, right? Is it money laundering to have done this? Is it insurance fraud as a result of it? Because you want to tell people, this isn't my house. This house belongs to some corporation. But you're actually living there. And your insurance company might have changed your insurance rates if they knew that you were using this as a principal residence and that it wasn't just some corporate holding facility. So those are, again, I know it's kind of a lot, but that's generally the framework I'm looking at it from.
Yeah, so if someone transfers a property into a corporation, does that automatically suggest concealment?
No, I don't think it. I think that it definitely raises questions, right? Because as I said earlier, why? If you spent $2.5 million on a thing, why would you give it away? I guess it could be a charitable thing, but frequently this is common enough that there is something I teach every first-year law school student, or maybe if you take corporations law in second year, that there's a term called piercing the corporate veil. Corporations are a legal fiction, right? A corporation's not actually like a physical thing. They may have more rights than people in America, but they're not, you can't go pick up a corporation and hold it. You can't go confront a corporation. You have to confront its representatives, or you can sue it in court, but it's essentially it's an idea, right? It's a goal. It's a bunch of paperwork that suggests that someone has decided to do something and they've made a corporation out of it. One of the things that can do then, let's say someone gets sued, right? I mean, one of the core benefits to a corporation is if you're involved in business and you get sued and you don't want to lose your own house, they sue the business, not you, because they were wronged by the business. Piercing the corporate veil occurs when you have someone who creates a corporation just for the legal benefit. There literally is no corporation. It's not adequately capitalized. It's just you, right? Like if I write my name down, I'm like Chris, O'Brien Corporation, LLC, or whatever it's going to be. And then anytime I get into legal trouble, I'm like, nope, you're dealing with the corporation, not the guy. Sorry, like I'm bulletproof. There is a very well understood procedure in every court in the country that would allow a court to say, no, like this corporate veil you've created is going to go away now because you're trying to hide behind a legal fiction and we're not going to allow you to do that. So a transfer for what is the legal term they use is de minimis value. It's basically nothing, right? Like $1 it might as well be nothing. In the instance that somebody tried to sue this person and take their house, right? If this speaker got sued and someone wanted to attach his property to try and like get any of the money they might win in a verdict, then he might say, well, you can't take my house, not my house. It belongs to this corporation. And then there's another step that going to have to be undertaken to pierce the corporate veil to attach the property. So it could simply be a way to try and separate oneself from one's assets if you have vulnerability or liability out there that you're worried about. What's interesting is if the purpose of this was to try and do something quietly, it doesn't appear to have worked, right? Because now it made the news. So if you were trying to conceal something, it seems to have backfired. Whether there's going to be agents of law enforcement who are scrutinizing it now, I don't know. I don't work on that side of things anymore. But it certainly caught a lot of people's attention.
Yeah, can you still build the case against the former speaker about this, knowing that, I guess this is Philippine law, but what if it was done there? Like him holding the property up until now. Is it still something that a prosecutor could put in his facts?
So again, I can't, without speaking to Filipino law, the fact of this transfer would absolutely factor into any prosecution. It would absolutely be a part of every narrative. Like, if we were dealing with maybe the situation that I had mentioned before where somebody was hiding expensive automobiles, like person loved driving expensive cars. Awesome. Good for you. Whatever. But if you're doing it on borrowed money and your creditors want their money back, well, they're going to come try to take it from you. And if that means they're going to take the cars back, maybe they're going to take the cars back. But what if you've gifted those cars to family members? What if you've registered those cars to dead family members? Weirdly, what you have then is insurance fraud for registering the car in the name of a person who doesn't drive it or who's deceased. But the transfer is not unlawful. But in the course of the trial, I brought a motion forward to the judge to say, we have evidence of creditors looking to try and take some money out of this guy. That's why he did this, right? That's why. The why of the transaction is the most important thing. Why did someone do this? And so if you're asking, will a prosecutor care or bring it up? Absolutely. The why is critical to proving intent. So if there was a crime here, the fact of the transfer and why it happened is going to be critical.
And for the public watching this, especially Filipinos following this story, what's the main takeaway? Should people immediately assume wrongdoing in a $1 transfer like this coming from a former Philippine House Speaker?
I always caution never to assume wrongdoing, which I think the problem is then you, especially if your goal is to find the truth, if you're a fact finder, or even a person who just generally cares about the truth, like objectively what really this is about, you can't start with those kinds of conclusions because you'll bend reality to try and make it fit your narrative, right? You're going to say everything you look at is going to be colored by the fact that you're already convinced this is something nefarious. But if you go at it, and it's not easy, right? I think it's something you have to practice. You go at it with a truly open mind. And it almost helps to do it like a mantra. Like at the very top of this interview, I said, we don't know. We don't know. Because you really, and I'm not being sarcastic. We just don't know. We don't have enough information. We're not empowered to get it. You got to leave that up to law enforcement. People should not reflexively assume that this is something illegal, nefarious, problematic. That being said, if there's other stars in the constellation I talked about earlier, if this is a person who is suspected of embezzling money before leaving the country, if this is somebody who is suspected of using their power to enrich themselves, now we have kind of a different story, right? Because this takes on a different appearance in the context of other alleged wrongdoing. Because then the why is crucially important. You're almost never going to get somebody to tell you the why. You have to infer it from the circumstances. I mentioned timing earlier, other details. But if you knew someone had been accused, credibly or otherwise, of a series of embezzlement crimes, and then they're purchasing real estate in another country and then taking their name off of it, well, now you have the grounds for an investigation. Whereas you probably don't if it's just a nominal transfer. But if you have other details, that can kind of get you into hot water.
I just have one last question here on
Shoot.
our formal interview. But before that, could you remind me and remind the audience, like, you're an attorney, you're a private defense attorney now, and we know for a fact that the speaker had a $2.2 million property. Is that something affordable for people living in Massachusetts?
Oh, I mean, that's going to be a pretty high-end property, even by Massachusetts standards. The cost of living, especially closer to Boston, has gotten kind of unreasonably high. But it's a result of demand and lack of inventory, right? This specifically where I am right now, this area was settled like almost 400 years ago. So they're not making any more land, and the land that's here resists being developed. At least the people who live here resist it being developed. And frankly, there just aren't a lot of places to put new houses. So the cost of houses is kind of is hilariously expensive. Even that being true, $2.2 million is a lot of money. This is not, the Silicon Valley where a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom is going to go for several $1 million. This could be a big piece of property. And, I guess it's sort of a question for you whether or not your politicians are politicians in Massachusetts frequently, it's sort of, you don't really get to be a politician if you don't have money. So maybe it's not that unusual for a politician to have a very expensive house, even though the job itself might not pay very much. But yeah, this is a big piece of property in Mass, in a pretty nice area, I think. So that may be probably why it caught so much attention.
Yeah, because we cannot fathom that a public official who's only getting paid, converted to U.S. dollar, $2,000 per month could afford a $2.2 million property in Dover, Massachusetts, and just dispose of it for $1. So what would be your advice for individuals or public officials who own property abroad and want to manage or transfer it properly without inviting suspicion?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to need to, I would say, go through an attorney, and preferably an attorney who knows if you do it this way, you're going to violate the law, right? Because specifically, you're going to want people who know about international reporting requirements. Because I mentioned the MLARS people earlier, like, because of money laundering and because a lot of it is known to be done through real estate transactions in America, it's a good place to park money because it's stable. There's a lot of due process to divesting people of the property that they putatively own. So it's a known issue. So they've made a lot of laws and regulations and empowered a lot of people to try and track that down. There are reporting requirements for bringing large amounts of cash into the country. And if you run afoul of those, that's a crime. So there's, you're going to want to get a lawyer who, if they either has direct experience in it or who can master the area of law in your particular jurisdiction to make sure that you're not accidentally walking yourself into a fairly serious offense. Or, as could be the case here, inviting unwanted scrutiny for no reason. I mean, maybe it's not no reason, but like I said, if this was somebody trying to hide something, it doesn't appear to have worked because they didn't hide it from you. They're not going to hide it from the folks that originally reported on it. Like I said, I think if you're someone who's trying to do this, make sure you do it legally. And if you're trying to do it quietly, consider how it might be picked up by people who have a vested interest in misreading your behavior.
Yeah, I'm kind of going back to what you said, the badges of fraud. Events leading up to this, but we can't assume. Everything is just going by the facts, but it is possible that this corporation was just built for this property early in May.
Well, yeah, no, look, that's true, according to, as far as I can tell, and I was not like doing this research like I was going to throw this in front of a jury. As far as I can tell, it looks like the articles of incorporation are fairly recent. It cites the purpose of the company as holding property. which again, nothing illegal about that. But you would find it would be an interesting set of circumstances if, like, the former speaker fled the country under a cloud of suspicion and then came here and dumped a bunch of money into real estate and then started doing these conveyances all over the place to various corporations. Like, once you start to see more, you become more suspicious. And I think that's appropriate, right? When you have very little, you shouldn't be suspicious. But when you have rather a bit more, your suspicion can kind of accordingly increase.
So how can we encourage our viewers to think like a prosecutor, to think like an investigator, and see that badges of fraud?
So I think, what I have said so far, I would reiterate that the two most important points are try to come with a level of remove to begin with. Like, don't make assumptions, because they will color how you view the evidence, and you really don't want that to happen. Take in every bit of information and try. I do think the best attorneys, the best prosecutors I had the opportunity to work with had a great way, they had a great minds for synthesizing information, right? So when a new piece of information comes in, a new discrete bit of data, maybe it's evidence, maybe it's nothing, being able to kind of evaluate that in the context of everything else. This also, I think, is true of defense attorneys, because when you get a piece of information in a broad investigation or a case, you need to know how it relates to everything else. Maybe it's meaningless, but like I said, if you want to think like a prosecutor, or even just someone who's trying to be careful in doing a legal analysis, you want to not jump to conclusions. You want to let the evidence speak for itself, and you want to be careful in evaluating how bits of information relate to each other. And kind of on that last point, one of the things I always found is my favorite part about working white-collar cases is you never know what thread you pull is going to show you a whole different set of facts, right? So that's why if this is more than what it looks like, this kind of transfer is more than what it looks like, it may have been a pretty serious mistake to have done it in a way that it kind of caught so much attention, and, because now someone may be looking. That said, and I mean, this is funny, there's a term, I think it's called a circular transaction. If he had sold the property to the corporation for $2.5 million, and then had the corporation give him $2.5 million for something else, that sort of, like, that moving of the money in that way could very easily get you into money laundering trouble.
But this particular transaction doesn't.
As far as I know, I mean, well, because again, if there really genuinely was the transfer was just for $1, then this corporation, which didn't exist a year ago, now has a $2.5 million property. Again, it could be a totally normal bit of estate planning, and I'm not, here to talk about the ways that this would be totally understandable and fine, which it may be, and I really want to be very clear about that. It's just, having seen this in the context of investigations, I know that it's not always as meaningless as it seems. Yeah. But I'm not saying that's what happened here. I'm just saying that people are interested for a reason.
Yeah. But let's stop being too formal here. We've talked about you being as a prosecutor, you spending a lot of years as a prosecutor, assistant attorney general. But now as a defense attorney, how would you defend this guy's move?
Well, I don't know that I would, at this point, with the information that's out there, this would be the easiest case in the world to defend. You got nothing. There is nothing here from what is presently known. There's no crime here. I don't even have to defend him against a specific crime, which would involve breaking down the elements and being like, you don't have this element, you don't have this element. You don't actually even have a crime to charge presently. With the information that we know, there is no crime, right? I mean, it looks weird, but absent other information, that's it. There's no... Now, if other information came to light, I'd respond differently, but this is, as it is, this guy doesn't need a defense attorney. If the police came knocking, though, if someone was looking at this critically and wanted to ask this guy some questions, you have to protect yourself. You want to make sure that you don't accidentally implicate yourself in something you weren't aware of. It's just really important to have an attorney who can prevent you from walking into some things you're not necessarily sure that you're about to walk into. And on that point, if you have financial exposure, potential financial exposure, you probably want a defense attorney who knows what an investigator is looking for. So you want to know what kind of crimes you could be exposed to. You want somebody who knows what title fraud is. So you don't say, this is an embezzlement, I was just trying to trick the title company, right? Because now you've kind of confessed to a different crime. So, general advice persists. You'll always be told, if you have nothing to hide, you don't need a lawyer. And that just isn't true. We wish it was, but it's not.
So the reality is, he doesn't need a defense lawyer, he just needs a PR guy.
for now. But again, the minute somebody from law enforcement wants to talk to you about this, get a lawyer. If somebody wants to interview you about this, might still be good to get a lawyer.
But to reiterate, Massachusetts doesn't care about this. Only the Philippines would.
No, I mean,
this
I think
particular situation.
I don't know that I would say that that's universally true, because if there are creditors in Massachusetts, and when you say Massachusetts doesn't care, criminally at this, I don't know what they would need more information, I think, to begin an investigation on something like this. More information than is presently known. But if there are creditors in Massachusetts who have now just been deprived of the opportunity, I mean, we didn't even touch on this. There is a crime for hiding assets from a support order. So if this person was under an order from a judge to turn over a certain amount of money, and then he just did this, to say, wow, I don't have it, like, that's a problem. That's almost certainly immediately a crime. But that's probably the only one, right? If there are creditors in the wings, just commercial creditors, we would have an interest in this being vetted, as a commonwealth, but not a criminal interest.
That would be my last question for today. We're cramped up with time, but thank you so much, Attorney O'Brien, for making the time to discuss this pressing issue in the Philippines, and I also believe in Massachusetts. Thank you also for helping us understand the legal and compliance issues behind what looks like a very complex but fascinating transaction. As you've made clear, even when something is lawful, transparency, timing, and intent are what really determines how it's viewed, both legally and publicly. Again, I'm Elijah from the Law Office of Matthew Peterson, and I'm with
Chris O'Brien.
And we'll continue to bring you clear, professional insight on international and white-collar legal issues that matter.
All right. Well, Elijah, thank you so much for having me on today. Chris O'Brien, Senior Trial Counsel, Law Offices of Matthew W. Peterson. Protect your innocence. Thank you so much for having me on today. And I hope this is of interest, and I hope that we have kind of communicated what I've been able to pick up from my experience as an attorney, and kind of how I view something like this and how someone else might view it if they were in my former job.